Hello and welcome, I'm Kara Scrivener, and today I'm going to talk about all my Victorian books, the ones that I've read, the ones I want to read, ones I'm afraid to read, all of those. This was a tag that was adapted by Roslyn Tilley from the Shakespeare Journey Tag, which was one that I had already seen and was like, oh, I really need to do this because I love Shakespeare. The first question is just, where did you start with Victorian books? I think I didn't really start anywhere. I kind of was in the midst before I even began. If I look back on my Goodreads, the first Victorian book that I read was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but I never clocked it as a Victorian book, so I didn't read it and become more interested in the era. Instead, I just read it as one of the well-known classics that I wanted to read. And this is kind of how my classic journey began for a long time. I did not grow up in a family that read classics readily. I once searched my entire house for a book assignment, and I found The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, and then I also found a Robin Hood book and some Anne of Green Gables books, and that was like it I could find for classic literature. So it was definitely not easy for me to just go to my shelf and read a book. But I did really enjoy reading classics in high school, and also I had dyslexia that kept me from reading until age like 11 or 12 with any real ability. I really, really loved reading. I really, really loved stories, but I often went to SparkNotes or to Wikipedia and like I would look up and like look at analysis of books that I'd never read, and that's how I got introduced to a lot of classics. So it's very murky when I actually began reading classics and when I began experiencing classics. But the first Victorian book that I remember reading and like fully falling in love and like doing all the research for was Daisy Miller by Henry James. And this is not a well-known book by him. I really love the way it talks about social mores and the way that women are interpreted in different societies, because Daisy Miller is American and a lot of people are British, and the way that they perceive her behavior is so different. And I love the kind of class and social critique of Victorian literature, and I think that's where I really fell in love. And then like later on that year, I read Far from the Madding Crowd, which would later begin my Thomas Hardy like love and like looking at his book. Even though I read that book primarily because I watched the movie, and I was like, why is there so many love interests? I just don't understand this book. But I think that my real beginning of Victorian literature and like my drive toward it began not with a Victorian book at all. It began with Yellow Wallpaper, which I read in like the beginning of 2018, and I was just like so mesmerized, and like I loved it so much. I had always considered myself as a classic reader, but I had not been like seeking them out as much. And like I really just dived into it, and that's when I read, Jekyll and Hyde, and I read like Daisy Miller shortly after that, and I just like began to assume that. I have to laugh at the second question because this is, have you ever been brought to tears by reading a Victorian book? If so, tell more. And I like cry during every book that I read, so this is not even a hard question to answer. I cry during books I don't like because I just really get invested in books and stories and emotions. But the last Victorian book that I cried at was The Last Chronicle of Farset. And there's this really powerful scene where one of the characters comes back from the warden, and it's a reunion of sorts, and I didn't know that I needed that, and like it is how I cried originally in the warden was because of some of these scenes, and then they come back and I just felt so powerfully about the different stories. The Warden is the first book in the Chronicles of Farset. It kind of stands out a little bit because it is quite short and it's very focused on politics and stuff. And it has a love story, but the love story is so slight that it's like barely mentionable. But the other books in the series kind of balloon and become much bigger and much more expansive and have a lot more characters in and out and stuff. So this book, though mentioned often, we don't actually see the main character of it that often, and we see the end of his story in the last Farset Chronicle, and it's so wonderful to have those characters come back and to have honor given to him, and it's so lovely. Question number 3, is there any people that have played a significant role in your Victorian literature journey? And this one is interesting because it hasn't really been any people in real life. Like my best friend Genevieve is like one of the reasons I love classics. She introduced me to like Shakespeare and just like our love of like going on and like talking about Les Miserables and like all of those different books is like something that is so important to our friendship, but we never really read like Victorian books. Like I know she read Jane Eyre and stuff, but we never really talked about it. And like I didn't read Jane Eyre until many, many years later. Even though she's a large reason why I'm a reader and a classic reader today, I can't really quite cite her for Victorian literature, but I can cite BookTube and like the many wonderful creators. Like I think just the love of Victober and the love of like watching people's videos and just becoming enmeshed with that. I've always been a huge fan of history and the Edwardian era and World War I and the Jazz Age, and like those are kind of the books and the classics I've always geared toward. I've always been a 20th century reader. So the reason why I got pulled back a little bit further is definitely because of BookTube and because like I found people who explained things and like talked about their love and stuff like that. And the two creators that I think influenced me most in this is Katie from Books and Things and Lucy the Reader. Just some of their videos going over different characters, or Katie's like 5 Victorian novels about like I just find those so helpful to like understand things and to like care, and then I just get so psyched up about books. And I just love book two for that reason. Like when I'm like, oh yeah, like that's so passionate and beautiful. So I think that without them, I would have probably skirted around Victorian literature even more than I have. Question number four is, do you have any favorite Victorian film adaptations or TV adaptations? And I'm really excited to talk about Vanity for 2018. I just think this miniseries is extraordinary. I just am obsessed with it. The book I really, really liked, except for as it went on, it just got like quite repetitive. Like it went into the serialized form where like, you know, you're overwriting a little bit, but the story is so good. So the miniseries just takes all of the good things and just cycles it into an extraordinary thing. And like there's humor, there's just all of the different narration and stuff. It just makes it so good, and I really, really enjoy it. The other adaptation I really, really love, it's not a TV show or a movie, but it's a musical, and this is a Jekyll and Hyde musical. It is mostly available through old recordings from the Broadway production and stuff, because it is not one that is performed today very widely, but it is called like the Gothic thriller. It takes a lot of liberties with the plot of Jekyll and Hyde. It adds not one but two love interests. So you really get to see both the Jekyll and Hyde and the different aspects of it, but it is so brilliant, and it keeps a lot of like the moral and the questions and the confrontation between the two sides of him very there. It's just illustrated through a little bit more of romance and women's characters as well. There's also two songs that I especially like that are very feminist, and this is Lisa Carew, and this is his main love interest, and it really highlights this woman who everyone is trying to own, and she's just like, no, like I need to be myself, and I need to be recognized for who I am, and it is so beautiful. I wish I could sing it because like just the way that it is said, I just really love it. It's just like beautiful to listen to. And then Girls of the Night is by Lucy. She is a lady of the night who first meets Jekyll in his more kind version and gets a very like good impression of him being very kind and gentle and not trying to take advantage of her. And then he meets Hyde, and the song Lucy Meets Hyde is also just so chilling and beautiful in like a really twisted way, where we really get like to see the ways in which one of the lines is that Hyde introduces himself to her, and then, you know, he says, I'm the person you'll find either heaven or hell with. And she replies, well, I don't think heaven has a place for me, and I can find hell in my own. And then he says in this hauntingly deep voice, you will never be alone again. And it's just that like abusing kind of type that you just see, and it's really haunting and does so many interesting things. A Dangerous Game and Confrontation are just also two really brilliant songs that highlight the Jekyll and Hyde narration and like who they are. Just the whole musical, I would just listen to it, and it's one of those musicals that, you know, you can listen from top to bottom and you will understand the plot very easily. And then when I was thinking about the ways in it described like kind of that abusive nature, I really thought of Bly Manor, because Turn This Through is one of my favorite Victorian novels. I really, really love it, and The Haunting of Bly Manor I just think is excellent. And there's certain scenes in that really do just a wonderful job of the ways that controlling men have it. There's a scene later on with like photographs that literally just chilled me. It is so beautiful. Like the set of it and the cinematography of it is beautiful. The haunting is beautiful. It's all of this creepy stuff. The kids are so well acted. I would so recommend both the book and the adaptation. I know The Turn of the Screw is not actually the most popular. A lot of people find it really boring. I find like you have to really get into like kind of all of the things going on. Like I think that reading about the themes and the origin of the book like really helped to like understand what's going on, and it's so cool. There's also a question about what adaptations you would like to see, and I would love like a full Barset Chronicles adaptation. I just finished this series, and I just think it's so brilliant, and this has never been done. First two books were combined and made into an adaptation in the 1980s, and then the third book was made an adaptation in 2017. And I just think that it's a shame that none of the other books have been adapted. The person who adapted the 2017 movie that I have not watched yet, but I'm sure it's great, is Julian Fellowes, who made Downton Abbey. I just think that Julian Fellowes would do a really good job of managing like all of the different characters through the whole series. So he's probably not making an adaptation of the whole series because he made the third book, but I feel like that would be really cool. And I just think that there's so much cool with like jumping between different stories and like all of the different characters and all of the things they grow and develop in. And I just think that it would be a wonderful series. Question number 5 is, what character from Victorian literature resembles you the most, and do you identify with the most? And my first thought was Becky Sharp from Vanity Fair, which will paint me as a terrible person. But I also love her wittiness, and just I don't tend to identify very strongly with the most pious of women characters or the most quiet or, you know, all of the things that we see. I also thought of Bathsheba Everdeen. She's the main character in Far From the Madding Crowd. I read it quite a few years ago, but the thing that really stood out to me is that she writes a Valentine's Day card and just sends it to a guy just to screw with him. She's like, he seems like he's bored. Maybe I should profess my love to him. I wonder what would happen then. And, the character that I primarily most identify with in any kind of literature is Emma Woodhouse because, I really love people. I like to think that I have a kind heart, but I also just enjoy meddling and messing with people sometimes. It's very fun. And I have matured with them, and I've learned from some of my faults, but I do just like to, do fun things sometimes. And yeah, I also thought about Mary Smith from Cranford. She's hangs out with a bunch of old ladies and writes down their stories, and I could definitely do that. I also in this thought about the daughter from the Mayor of Casterbridge, but I forgot her name. But like, she really likes books, and they're just like piling everywhere, and she just is in love with them. So I feel like also her would be relatable. Talking about Cranford, the sixth question is: do you have a favorite moment, scene, or line from Victorian literature? And I have to say Cranford. Like the opening of this is just so brilliant. I think it's lovely. In the first place, Cranford is in the possession of the Amazons. All the holders of the houses above a certain rent are women. If a married couple come to settle in the town, somehow the gentleman disappears. He is either fairly frightened to death by being the only man in Cranford evening parties, or he is accounted to by being with his regiment, his ship, or closely engaged in business in the beat of the great neighboring commercial town of Trumbull, distant only 12 miles on the railroad. In short, whatever does become of the gentlemen, they are not in Cranford. I just think it is so funny and so great. I also thought about Elizabeth in Her German Garden, one of my favorite Victorian novels. I think it is so underrated, and there's just so many beautiful scenes of her gardening and just enjoying life. I pulled one up to read on my computer. What a happy woman I am, living in my garden with books, babies, birds, and flowers, and plenty of leisure to enjoy them. Yet my town acquaintances look upon it as an imprisonment. I find it really, really good. Because I'm also extra, I'm going to also read from Sonnet to the Portuguese. And this is the 14th sonnet, and it says, if thou must love me, let it be for naught, except for love's sake only. Do not say, I love her smile, her look, her way. Question number 7 is, does any Victorian literature intimidate you? And the answer is yes, most of it. I've only read 34 Victorian novels, and 6 of them have been in the last 6 months. So I'm not particularly well read in Victorian literature, and most of the big tomes I have not yet read. And even like Tenant of Wildfell Hill, I've been saying I'm going to read that since 2017. I haven't read it yet. And like, part of it is like, I'm a very, very slow reader, and I don't read fast, and I like to annotate, and it just takes so long for me to read books. And like, I have not read that many classic books physically because it takes me months upon months to read. But I also like have ADHD, so I get distracted and like I don't finish them. Like I have White Soldier Sea like somewhere around here, and I haven't finished it because I keep on annotating the heck out of it, and then like I don't finish it because like it's been days or I'm busy or like things like that, and I don't get back to it. And yeah, I want to read books physically, so I put them off and then I don't read them, and like I know I need to just get over that. And often I'll have a book beside it and annotate it when I read it on audio, but there feels sometimes like you should be reading these books physically, and then when I don't, I feel bad. But I also know like books like The Way We Live Now or something like that I know I'm gonna enjoy. I'm gonna annotate. There's so many books I haven't read because I feel like I want to do a good job of them, and I'm afraid that I'm not gonna do a good job of them, so I just don't. And I don't want to just like skim through them. Like I really want to dive in and enjoy them, and I'm worried that I won't because I won't be able to get it all because I can't read it physically, or it's gonna take me so long that I'm gonna jump in and out and not enjoy it in the same way. So just all of those things whirl in my head and make it hard for me to read large books. Talking about all my insecurities, I can go on to 8, which is, do you have any tips for anyone who's early in the Victorian journey? And I'm going to steal the first one from Tilly, who said, like, don't just read the big names. Like, I still have not read many of their, like, large books. And I think that you don't need to read, like, a Dickens or, a Bronte or something like that to feel like you read Victorian literature. Like, when I talk about Daisy Miller or Elizabeth and Her German Garden or The Importance of Being Earnest, like, the books that I read at first were often quite small and, like, they were digestible. And also, like, use SparkNotes, use lit charts, like, these things, like, that are helpful. Like, I find it so helpful if you're confused in the book to, like, look at the themes. Like, I'm reading Silas Marner right now. I'm not confused by themes, but I'm just, like, I really wanted to DNF it from the beginning. Like, I was on page 2, and I was like, no. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to look up the themes and, like, look up what she's doing, and hopefully I'll enjoy it more. I don't think I'm enjoying it more, but at least passable because it's a short book, and I'm reading an audio. Would just really recommend, like, choosing books that you're interested in. Listen to people talk about books, or, like, about themes, or, like, about the things they enjoy about them, and, like, think about, would I like that thing, or do I like that thing in a modern book or another classic book? And also, if you're trying to read Dracula or like Jekyll and Hyde, just know that they're not action-packed. Like, there's action in parts of Dracula. There's no action in all of Jekyll and Hyde. Like, don't go in expecting these books to be fast-paced. They're almost always going to be more, like, contemplative and thought-provoking. Also, don't be afraid to read, like, books from the 1880s and 1890s that are a little closer. Like, sometimes reading the Brontes are, like, much more wordy than, like, the later Victorian authors. And last but certainly not least, I want to give recommendations to other Victorian people. I wasn't planning on talking about it this much, so it's probably a little bit redundant now, but Elspeth in the German Garden, like, super good. Really readable, really interesting, reflective. It has a lot of feminist themes, and it has, like, this, writer who's a woman who's writing, and people are, like, talking about whether women should write, and obviously a woman is writing this book, so it's very funny, and there's some, like, aspects of it, and it just has beautiful nature writing, beautiful characters. And then Lady Windermere's Fan, I just think, is an extraordinary play. It is by Oscar Wilde, and it looks at, like, this husband and wife, and the wife thinks the husband is cheating, so there's, like, a lot more going on, and we really see, like, these emotional themes and these really funny themes, and it's such a beautiful play, and I really, really like it. So, yeah, those are my two recommendations of some, like, more underrated Victorian books that I just think are, like, really wonderful to read, and they're both kind of short and easily readable. So question number 10 is to tag someone, and I want to tag Camila from Tasty Books, and I really, really love her channel. I love just hearing her talk about things, and her excitement, and her joy, and I feel like this would just be so wonderful to listen to her talk about it, and anyone else who is doing Victober or just likes Victorian literature, I would love to hear your thoughts about this, or comment them in below, and yeah, just enjoy Victober, enjoy Victorian literature. It's not that fearful, I say, as I've been afraid, but, like a young boy growing up in a coming-of-age novel, it's gonna be okay. You're gonna have a rich relative.